Hi, this is Paul. Today is Friday. It's Friday morning. We had the rehearsal. We had my son's rehearsal. We had a rehearsal brunch for all the out-of-town family. We had the rehearsal. The wedding venue is about an hour and a half out of town. Then, of course, we had to eat after, so we had a rehearsal dinner and then got home late last night and got up early this morning. Had to finish up the ceremony because everybody pays attention to the clothing and the venue and the food and the details, but only the pastor pays attention to the ceremony. So I had to finish up the ceremony for my son's wedding, and it was yesterday that Rick texts me and says, "Oh, guess what dropped today? The Alex O'Connor Jordan Peterson conversation, and I have all your video equipment." And Rick does, because Rick is helping to videotape the wedding. So I'm emptying the dishwasher, I'm cleaning up the kitchen and doing all of those things this morning. And that's usually when I listen to videos, when I do all those things. And so I'm not going to be able to bring a lot of commentary like I usually do on the conversation. So far, it's really excellent. This is, I think, one of the better Jordan Peterson biblical pushback conversations we've had. I think actually the sort of the mix is right in terms of just everything's going well with it so far. I'm only about 40 minutes in, but I wanted to talk about the video camera historical question that arises inevitably all the time. That question is a function of the Enlightenment. It's not purely a function of the Enlightenment. If you read the Bible, you will see that biblical conversation partners, you can find these especially in the book of Acts with the Apostle Paul making claims, plenty of skepticism. Thomas, of course, skeptical about the resurrection, and Thomas in that sense is sort of a proto-materialist. Unless I can put my fingers in the wounds and put my hand in the side, he tells the rest of the disciples, I ain't believing it. So the physicality is obviously an important thing. And again, those of you who've been watching the channel know that I continue on my crusade to correct the word literally as it is written. That's what literally means. And the reason we use that word is very important. It's sort of a vestigial element left over from Renaissance humanism that deeply got into the Protestant Reformation, et cetera, et cetera. Usually we use it for emphasis. Sometimes we use it for physically. Sometimes we don't really quite know how we're using it, so on and so forth. So they're in the weeds in terms of this historical. Now remember, when we use the word historical, we're almost always using it in a modernistic sense. And we're tending to use it in sort of a sense of physical correspondentism. And Jordan Peterson laid that out quite well earlier. He said a correspondence to facts. And again, implicit sort of in the idea of facts is this physical correspondentism. Now, part of the reason all of this stuff is changing now is because we now have a better understanding of the complexity of perception and physical seeing. And to a degree, when Alex O'Connor tries to shift to a Panasonic, wow, was there product placement in that? I don't think there was. A video camera, a Panasonic video camera. Actually, if you do a lot of work with cameras, you'll want a Sony, because I had a Panasonic camera, didn't focus for anything, and the Sony camera focuses great. Anyway, you get into this question about what would the camera see. Now, let's back it up in terms of people first. Because the first observation is, even in the biblical corpus, there are a number of times and places when something dramatic happens, something important happens, something mythological happens, something existential, ontological happens. Now I feel like I'm channeling Russell Brand here. When something happens and you have different eyewitness observers receiving it in different ways. You can find this in, for example, in John chapter 12, where Jesus is, we're heading towards the Passion. Jesus makes the statement, I don't want to do any editing, so I did, in fact. Come on, computer. Now my soul is troubled, says Jesus, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there heard it and said it thundered. Others said an angel had spoke to him. Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now, this is a very interesting passage because a lot of more ardent biblical skeptics will, of course, say that the Gospel of John is of even lesser historical quality, let's say, than the Synoptic Gospels. Others will very much push back on that. But what's interesting about this account is that this account has embedded within it the dynamic of different observers being present in the same physical location at the same time, seeing different things. You can find similar dynamics in, for example, the account of Paul on the road to Damascus. In fact, if there is a historical figure that nobody doubts, and really nobody can doubt, this is sort of the basis of the minimal facts argument with respect to the resurrection, it's Paul of Tarsus, because nobody doubts the existence of Paul of Tarsus. I think Alex O'Connor recently made a skeptical judgment about something that Paul said towards the end of 1 Corinthians. Nobody doubts Pauline authorship of 1 Corinthians. I mean, nobody doubts Pauline authorship of Romans. Nobody doubts Pauline authorship of Galatians. I mean, these are about as hard as you're going to find. Nobody doubts the historicity of Luke, and they have plenty of questions about his conceptualization and his characterization of many of the events that he writes about in the book of Acts, but nobody doubts Luke, nobody doubts Paul, and I don't think anybody really doubts the fact that Paul had a dramatic experience on the road to Damascus. Now the question is, what did the people around him see, and what didn't they see? And so you can read that Paul himself, in a number of ways, even within the book of Acts, and Luke records the variants, which I think, again, is to the historical credit of that book. Luke records the variants in Paul's telling of this story. I believe he tells it also in Galatians. But you will have different experiences of this by different witnesses. Now, I'm going to make an argument that is an argument. I would argue that, number one, if you, let's say, read Charles Taylor, A Secular Age, Charles Taylor makes the point that there are different kinds, there's sort of different kinds of history in terms of how people record it and think about it. So that's a sort of a cultural level. But it's also the case that people in dramatic, important, existential, ontological, religious, ecstatic moments, even sort of in what we imagine to be ordinary time, articulate these experiences in different ways. Now, I'm going to give you a very mundane example. And this example will illustrate the fact that all of us as human observers are not sort of innocently, naively experiencing things as they happen. You're sitting at home alone. A loved one is late in coming home, and you begin to wonder what has happened. And you begin to get a little bit anxious about it. And then suddenly you begin to have a sense of, oh, maybe something's wrong. Well, maybe it's just my anxiety. Maybe it's just my nerves. Maybe it's my intuition, blah, 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 blah. And you hear a car pull up to the house, and you look out the window, and you see a police officer and someone wearing a cheap windbreaker that says chaplain. Many people who have had this experience will say they don't remember anything after that. They open the door, they listen to the words, but now psychologically we can say, well, they disassociate. Okay, fair enough. Obviously, they didn't quite have that language. They didn't use that specific language in 2,000 years ago. But what happens when you witness something, even something that, let's say, as mundane as a video camera or a security camera would record, people disassociate. People then go sort of into a different mode of apprehension. And once they're in that different mode of apprehension, their recording of this changes. Now, we know a lot more about this. We have EMDR. Now, I just was reading on some comment thread. EMDR doesn't work on me. Well, that's fine. It works on some people, and it's a crazy thing, watching this little light bar go and remembering memories and blah, 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 blah. We have all this new knowledge about how, in fact, the mind captures things. And so the fact that the New Testament has, on many occasions, an understanding that different people apprehend the same thing in different ways, it's vitally important. Okay, number 2, what about a video camera? We have no idea. Okay, now I'm going to use it will seem like a silly example, but let's just consider it as data. So, some of you might remember that I really enjoy the Curse of Oak Island. I think something's under there. I sure don't know what. I doubt it's the Ark of the Covenant. But whatever's been it's probably pulverized and destroyed down there. But there's gold and silver down there. Yada yada yada. It's fun to watch these people from the Upper Peninsula spend all of their money trying to get down there. It's a great show. I enjoy it. Well, after that comes the Skinwalker Ranch show. And the Skinwalker Ranch is a seriously weird place. And, you have all this GPS data, and there's a ton of, so I sit there and I watch it with my 2 sons, both of whom have engineering degrees, and they're complaining about this and they're complaining about that, but we all still watch because it's seriously weird. Is it demonic? Well, now we're going to get into the whole alien demon thing. A while ago, someone had me read the Mothman prophecies. And there is a ton of human recorded events of people have weird things happen. People have weird things happen, and people disassociate. People have different recollections. Sinai. What happens at Sinai? God comes down and declares the law from the top of the mountain, and people are terrified and want him to shut up. And Moses has to go up the mountain. What happened? What would a video camera see? Who knows? Because we think that, well, all of this technology, this would really capture something. And this goes back to the main point that is really underneath the point that Jordan is continuing to try to make, which is, what do we mean by believe? And actually underneath that is, we can thank Jordan Peterson for just opening up this conversation for us, because underneath that is this question of faith, because faith is sort of this liminal space between, and this is exactly what the book of Hebrews says, this is exactly what Christians have said for centuries, it's this liminal space between sort of a sense of tangible certainty, which is sort of what the materialists and the modernists are always trying to get their hands on, and this living into a new reality. So this later this afternoon, early this evening, my son and my future daughter-in-law, and we love her both. We love them both. Obviously, we love my son, but love our future daughter-in-law. We are super happy they're getting married. My son was a little slow in our terms, in terms of popping the question and getting underway with his life and so on and so forth. But we are so eagerly excited about this marriage, and hopefully someday they will have children and provide us with grandchildren. All of this, but this is faith, because we also know that bad things happen. So when you go and you stand up there and you pledge your troth and you promise to love and you commit yourself in sickness and in health till death do you part, it is faith. Because you don't know what that other person's going to become. You don't know what you're going to become. You don't know any of these things. You don't know what calamities will befall. And calamities do befall. All of this is faith. Now, when we're asking these questions, okay, well, what about Moses? And the questions beneath all of this, like I said, I don't want to cut this. There's wind outside. Otherwise, I would have done this outside. The questions beneath all of this are really questions of faith. I want to know. I want to trust. I want to have certainty. And the consistent biblical message is, you can't. We're living in the age of decay. Not in this age right now can you have the kind of certainty that you want to secure for yourself the desired future that you have. Number one, your desires are all messed up, because if you would actually get what you wanted to, you would change what you wanted. Number two, that's not what this age affords, which is why the Bible talks about a new heavens and a new earth. That's the consummation. Get into that in other videos. Anyway, so we and then I come roundabout to the miracle point that I make often to people, which is nobody saw more miracles than the disciples of Jesus. They saw him change water to wine. They saw him feed the 5,000. They saw him raise the dead. They saw him heal multiple people in villages of lameness and blindness and deafness. They saw him still a storm. One of the things that is consistently true of all of these miracles, and I find this today with people who claim to have seen miracles as well, is it does not secure the kind of knowledge and certainty and power and conviction and agency that you think you want or you think you need. And in fact, you could use more of. It doesn't secure any of that. The disciples who watch Jesus do all these miracles, and Jesus says, okay, we're on the road to Jerusalem. I'm going there. I'm going to be turned over into the hands of Gentiles. I'm going to be killed. In 3 days, I'm going to be raised. I'm going to rise again. Number one, they protest the killing. No, this can't happen. Okay. Number two, they don't even hear that he says, I'm going to rise again. Why don't they hear it? Well, maybe they heard it. Maybe they heard it physically. Maybe they saw his lips move. Maybe they saw all of that, but what don't they do? They don't show up at the tomb Easter Sunday morning. And the only one who shows up at the tomb are the women who are doing the dirty work of embalming a corpse that has been in the ground, not 3 full days, a different way of counting, but, almost, a day and 3/4 or so. So that, oh boy, those women were, and how are we going to roll away the stone? I mean, the Bible is full of this sort of phenomenological, and as theologians have said throughout the history of the world, perspectives of common human beings. That's the nature of the text. It's eyewitness testimony. You can look up Richard Bauckham. It's the nature of this. And so even if Jesus appeared to Alex O'Connor. One day, Alex O'Connor is about to sit down and enjoy his supper, and Jesus pops into the room. And Jesus says, Alex, give me a loaf of bread. And Alex gives Jesus a loaf of bread, and Jesus says, watch very carefully. I'm going to make it 2, and I'm not just going to tear it in half. But suddenly they recognize him at the breaking of the bread road to Emmaus, and they disappear. So the reason we are having this conversation around what would a video camera see? What would this be? What if we really saw it? What if we saw Moses on Sinai? What if we saw, the disciples saw Jesus do all of these things, and still they didn't have the faith. And it's until, now I just preached on Pentecost last week, the coming of the Holy Spirit. Well, what on earth does that mean? The Holy Spirit comes in Acts 2, and Paul is still persecuting the church in Acts 7. What's going on? Well, life is a very strange, mysterious place, and you're not going to solve it, ardent little modernists, with having Jesus pop into your room and doing a little miracle for your amusement. This is part of the reason when Jesus, who is arrested, appears before Herod, and Herod's like, oh, I want to see some tricks, and Jesus is like, pointless. I'm not going to waste my time showing you tricks. You're not going to believe. Then Paul preaches in front of, I believe, just off the top of my head, Festus. Festus, do you think you can convince me right here and right now? And basically the biblical answer to all of this is, well, actually, the one to convince you and change you is the Holy Spirit. Well, that's frustrating, because I wanted to secure it myself. I wanted to arrange all the chairs, have Jesus show up and do a little miracle, say, okay, Jesus, now I believe you. No, you don't really. Because faith is an entirely different matter. Because Jesus' disciples saw Jesus do all of these things, and they flee at his arrest, and they doubt his resurrection, and even after the Spirit is given, well, Peter and Paul can't agree on what to do with Gentiles in terms of what they should eat. This is the manner. And now Paul, of course, gets arrested. That's what I'm preaching on this Sunday. Paul gets arrested in 21 and 22 in the events of Jerusalem. Very realistic events laying out from everything we know about history. But again, this answer solves nothing. Jesus can pop in and do a trick for you. You still will have to figure out the Christian life. And so in that sense, Jordan Peterson is right in that, there's a whole lot we don't know. And I'll just tell this little story. Jim Scop wrote a book, tiny little book on Mother Teresa. I wrote a little blurb for the back of that book. It's a lovely little book, but the book makes a brutal point. Everybody's like, oh, Mother Teresa, great saint, help the poor. If there's one thing that Jesus has sufficiently colonized the Western world in, is that helping the poor is a godly thing. Well, we all agree with that. So great. We all agree with that. So Mother Teresa's out there helping the poor. And an ethicist named Kavanaugh makes a pilgrimage, and he wants Mother Teresa and says, I want you to pray for me. What would you like me to pray for? I want certainty. And Mother Teresa says, no. Actually, it's not in that James Scott's book. It's in a Brendan Manning book. I won't pray for that for you. What do you mean? Well, you won't pray for that for me? Because what you really lack is trust. You want certainty, but you lack trust. What is trust another word for? Pistis, faith. That's what you really need. That's actually what you really want. That's what you desire. Now, be careful what you pray for and be careful what you ask for, because generally speaking, the kinds of things that God uses to grow faith in us are almost always the kinds of things that we desperately don't want for people we love, like our children. It's like, I want my children to have faith. Okay. God is going to bring them through a costly path. And in that costly path, faith will grow. You say, well, no, I want a miracle. Like I said, I know plenty of Pentecostals. I know plenty of de-evangelicals who, if you sit them down and you ask them, have you seen miracles? Yeah, I saw miracles. I saw this. Do you believe in miracles? No. Again, read C.S. Lewis's book, Miracles. First thing in the book, the only person that I've ever known who has seen a ghost doesn't believe in ghosts. This is not how human beings work. Human beings do not work like supposed rationalists. Even the rationalists don't work that way. So we can spend hours on YouTube pointing out the inconsistencies of this rationalist or this skeptic or that person or that person. To be inconsistent is to be human. That's simply not how we function in terms of making the decisions about how to live. Oh, I've spent 23 minutes in the car. I've polished off my wedding message. I have to get dressed. We have a long drive. I have to help all of the siblings manage. They'll be coming in. I've got my family from the East Coast. They're all in an Airbnb. We're going to have a massive day today. It's going to be a tremendous day. It won't be live streamed, so sorry. We'll see how Rick does with the recording. But in any case, Lord willing, at the end of this day, my son, I'll have a new daughter-in-law, and we love her to death. And it's been great getting to know her family. And so it's going to be a blessed day. And, this is the first take on Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor. We'll see if I have more to say. I usually get caught up in all of the little dramas of the corner and helping people find good conversation partners to grow faith in the midst of their trials, which it's always the trials that grows our faith. So, yep, I didn't think I'd be able to get a little video out about this. Sorry, no commentary, interstitial commentary on it. Just Rick's got all my equipment, but yeah. So far, 40 minutes into the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor video. Awesome. Can't wait to listen to the rest of it. I don't know how much time I will have to listen to the rest of it, but here you go.